Hey folks, have you ever looked at a wildfire and wondered how it burned that way, or why some areas look completely black with almost no vegetation left, while other areas are still green with almost all the vegetation intact? Well, if you have, stick with us. We're going to break it down for you. I'm Glen Lewis, and I'm a fire behavior analyst with Rocky Mountain Incident Management Team 1, and we're here managing the Gold Mountain and Elk fires in southwestern Colorado. Now, as firefighters, we're taught three basic factors to size up wildfires. One is the terrain that the fire is burning in. Two is the weather conditions that the fire is burning under. And three, the fuels that the fire is burning through. And now these three things can interact in various ways, and in some ways it can get pretty complicated and pretty complex. But like most things that are complex, you could break it down into its simpler form and make it easier to understand. So today, we're going to talk about one of those factors, the fuels, and specifically why the aspen tree is a firefighter's friend. And to understand that, we first need to discuss some of the vegetation types that exist on the Gold Mountain fire. Basically, there are four basic fuel types that exist on the Gold Mountain fire, and those are broken out into the vegetation or fuel types, as we call them in the firefighting world. The first is the oak brush, and you can see here, in most cases, we tend to think of oak trees as a tree in most other areas. But here in Colorado, the Gamble oak tends to form much more of a brushy type species, as you can see here. Very filled out. These can be anywhere from 10 or 20 foot tall or even higher, and they tend to be very, very, very dense, very packed with fuel. And when you look at them and when you approach them, they almost look a lot like a wall of fuels. And they're very dense. They're very difficult to get through or even around these. And when they get dry out and the wind starts to blow, fire moves through them very rapidly with high rates of spread and a lot of intensity. And that can be really challenging to try and be effective with your firefighting. The next fuel type that we want to talk about is, again, at lower elevations, just like the oak brush, is the pinyon juniper. And again, you can see this looks very much, again, like a brushy species with branches all the way to the ground. Very dense, very full, with lots of fuel in the canopy. Now, when you take a step back and you look at pinyon juniper, you can see it's not quite as dense as the oak brush is, but still contains a lot of fuel. And these tend to burn, again, once it dries out, under high wind conditions. And so when they do burn, they move from tree to tree very rapidly, very high rates of spread, and again, can be really challenging to try and get out in front of to be able to do effective firefighting. So the next vegetation type as we move up in elevation consists of various conifer trees, firs, spruce, subalpine fir, and we kind of lump them together into what we call mixed conifer. And you can see when you look at them that they have branches that come down quite a bit, in some cases almost to the ground level. They have fuels of fine branch materials and needles all the way up them, and they tend to be very tall. But also in the understory, you can see that there tends to often be a lot of deadened down material that creates pretty intense surface fuel fires that can loft itself up and get up into the trees pretty easily. Now, the great thing about mixed conifer forests is that they tend to look very majestic from a distance. And this is what creates these scenes that we all love to come to the Rocky Mountains for and gives us these beautiful views. And they tend to form these very dense, large patches of trees that are pretty similar in type. But you can imagine as a fire moves through here with these trees that are very tall, they tend to torch up, they create a lot of intensity, a lot of heat, and they are really effective at throwing embers long distances. And that tends to start spot fires out in front of the main fire, and they tend to burn together. And so it's, again, very challenging firefighting environment to be in, to be effective, especially when you start combining it with these steep slopes out here. And so you really are challenged to try and be effective with a fire line to hold it there. So the next fuel type that we want to talk about is the grass fuels, the meadows that kind of exist throughout the elevations of the Gold Mountain and Elk fires both. but mostly exist more up in the upper elevations. And what you can see here, it's important to note that right down the middle of this where we have a little bit more moisture, it's still green in there, and that inhibits fire spread. Fire really doesn't want to spread it all through it, and that's been a pretty effective break, especially in the upper elevations on the Gold Mountain fire here. But you can also see in some of these areas here, some of this is rock, but some of these areas are starting to cure out. They're turning a little yellow or brownish color, and those will carry fire. And fire will spread through it pretty rapidly, but we can be pretty effective in those areas, and it doesn't throw spots like the other types of fuels do. So then that brings us to the aspen, our firefighter's friend, right? So the first thing that I want to point out is that the very composition of how aspen trees and aspen stands are built is fundamentally different. And so this is a good example here. You have some of these mixed conifer type trees here. You can see very full trees with lots of fuels up and down, almost going all the way to the bottom. Where the aspen tree tends to grow up and have the branches and the leaves very much in the very upper layer of the canopy. And even when you look over here at the younger aspen trees here, even though it does have some branch material down low, aspen trees tend to shoot up very quickly, reaching towards the sun, and they tend to shed these lower branches as they grow and get taller. So that's a significant factor in just how the structure of an aspen differs from the other fuels that we talked about. So also another significant factor is the surface fuels that exist in the understory of an aspen stand. As you can see, it tends to be much more wetter in the bottom of an aspen stand, and part of that is because of the shading, but also what will happen is in the fall when the leaves are shed off from the aspen stand, they tend to form a dense mat, and that kind of traps some moisture in the soil, upper soil moisture here, and that helps encourage this herbaceous material to grow in here. And this herbaceous material holds a lot of moisture in it, and it's very inhibitive to fire spread. Fire does not really want to spread very well for it. It will absorb a lot of heat before it will actually burn, and therefore it's not a net contributor to the overall heat, and therefore the fire spread. Now there will be some deadened down material in here, some wooding material kind of hiding in here, but in general it's not very heavy. And fire can spot into it and it will actually catch that wood down in there. And so you'll see smoke coming from the bottom of an aspen stand sometimes, but it's not really spreading through there. If it is, it's spreading very slowly, moving from a large log to large log, and it just doesn't really tend to want to move very quickly. So now that's not the case for all aspen stands. There are some aspen stands that have some mixed conifer in them. And that tends to produce some extra fuels in them. There are some diseased aspen stands in the Rocky Mountains that have become decadent, and they tend to have a lot more deadened down material in the understory. But what you really don't see, even when you get that intensity, you don't see a crown fire. You don't see the fire running through the crowns in the aspen. And so they tend to be pretty effective barriers. They at least slow fire generally. In some cases are even an effective barrier to fire spread. And so that is a big factor in it. And you can kind of see here again, where limited branch material that goes down to the bottom here. So one of the things that we want to look at then, getting back to our original slide here, when we look at this, this is a picture of the Gold Mountain fire here. And you can see over here, especially over here, these were the mixed conifer stands. You can see it burned very intensely there and over into here and even down into some of this area. And even these stringers here have burned almost completely up. But you can also see these green patches in here and here, and you can see this green patch down in here. And even along here, there's a thin patch there. That's aspen. And even as intensely as the fire was carrying through the area, you can see that it hit the aspen and didn't pass through it. In some cases, you can see there's some white lines here where these are the aspen leaves that they're still attached actually in some cases, but all the moisture's gone, so they're kind of all crinkled up. But they didn't actually burn, they just absorbed moisture, slowed the fire down, and it's going to kill some of these stems along here from the aspen tree. And kind of a side note, the aspen stands that you see up on the hill, if you're unaware, are all one organism. There's a large underground root system that that shoots come up from, and they tend to live for a very, very long time with new shoots coming up. And so a fire like this can actually help regenerate. Some of these older stems will die off, but it will trigger the mechanism to put up new shoots and instigate a new kind of generation of aspen in those stands. So again, moving along here, this is another picture here, and you can see what the mixed conifer burned over here very intensely. You can see here several aspen stringers in here, and you can see some of the white trees, aspen trees that it did burn, and some more aspen down here, again, that did not burn. It's been a pretty effective way to slow the fire down, and in some cases it did actually serve as a barrier to the fire spreading. Another good picture here, I really like this picture because it shows a couple of things here. In the foreground here, and it's a little bit cut off here, this is some of the oak brush. This is a little bit lighter oak brush down in here, and then you have the aspen kind of in the middle here, and then back here you have some of the mixed conifer, and you can see another stringer of the aspen here. So you can see that the fire was coming from this direction over here, off to my left, off to your right, as you're looking at it. And you can see it did not burn. It kind of parted ways almost when it came to the aspen stand here and burned through this mixed conifer very intensely, through some spots up in front of it. But the aspen kind of held it. And you can see it took a bunch of the heat out when it did come over here. And so it didn't burn very effectively through this oak brush. So that was a pretty good example of it. And the one other thing that I'd like to talk about that really makes the aspen the firefighter's friend, and it's a little secret that it has, and that is in the composition of the leaves, composition of the structure. Aspen leaves tend to hold a lot of moisture in them, and the one thing that really makes them different from all the other species that we were talking about today is that they don't have the volatile oils within the needles or within the leaves that even the oak trees have that makes them want to burn more intensely. It's kind of like pouring gasoline on fire. The aspen leaves are almost like a little bit of sprinkling of water in the fact that they have a bunch of moisture that's absorbing heat rather than contributing to heat. So that's kind of what we got going there in terms of that. And now you can see why the aspen stand is considered firefighter's ally.